I never planned on getting revenge. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to pull off something like this. But then again, I never thought someone in my own family would treat me like I was beneath them. I'm Rachel, 33 years old, a graphic designer living in Seattle with my fiancé, Daniel. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We worked hard, had a cozy apartment, and were excited for our future together. Then, my Aunt Vivian decided to turn my wedding into a power play. Vivian was my dad's older sister. A widow, wealthy beyond reason, and obsessed with status. She lived in a sprawling estate, drove a vintage Rolls-Royce she barely touched, and spent her days at the Cascadia Elite Club, the kind of place where people sip champagne and pretend the world outside doesn't exist. She always looked down on those without money. Growing up, I ignored it, but when she ignored my wedding invitation, not once, but 3 times, it wasn't an accident. It was a statement. I sent her a final text just 2 weeks before the wedding. "Hey, just wanted to check if you'd be able to come. It would really mean a lot." Her response? "Oh, I'll see if I'm free." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the month she ignored me. And then, she ghosted me again. Maybe I would have brushed it off. But then, my cousin Sophie let something slip. Vivian had laughed about my little backyard wedding and never had any intention of coming. That night, I sat with Daniel, trying not to cry. He told me not to let her get to me, but it did. The wedding came, and she never showed. My parents made excuses for her, but I knew the truth. And then, 1 week later, I saw it. Vivian's Instagram post. A photo of her at the Cascadia Elite Club, glass of champagne in hand, the caption reading, "Living my best life." She blew off my wedding for a club event. That was when something shifted inside me. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. I tried to move on. Really, I did. Vivian wasn't the first person in my life to look down on me, and she wouldn't be the last. But something about this stung in a way I couldn't shake. Maybe it was because I had truly wanted her there. I didn't invite her for show. She was family. No matter how arrogant she was, I had hoped, just this once, she'd show up for me. And instead, she publicly humiliated me without even trying. I kept replaying that Instagram post in my head. The gold-rimmed champagne glass, the perfect sunset view from the Cascadia Elite Club. It wasn't just that she skipped my wedding. It was the message behind it. Living my best life. She wanted me to see that. She wanted everyone to see that. To her, my wedding was nothing. My happiness, my effort, beneath her. That's when I realized something. Vivian never ignored me. She dismissed me. She dismissed everyone who wasn't on her level. She had spent her whole life making sure people knew where they stood. Less than her. That's when I knew I wasn't just mad about the wedding. I was mad about all of it. The way she treated my parents like afterthoughts. The way she humiliated restaurant staff who didn't meet her standards. The way she bragged about slipping past rules, bending systems in her favor, using her money like a shield. And the worst part? She had never faced consequences. Not once. But there was one thing Vivian did respect. The club. I sat with that thought for a long time. Because if Vivian respected one thing in this world, that meant she had something to lose. I stayed up that night researching Cascadia Elite Club. It was an invite-only institution with $50,000 annual membership fees and a reputation for exclusivity. The club wasn't just a place to drink overpriced wine and complain about commoners. It was a networking goldmine, a place where money met power. Vivian wasn't just a member, she was deeply involved. I found old club event pages with her name all over them. Fundraisers, galas, exclusive retreats. This was her world. And just like any world built on status, it had rules. There were 3 that stood out. Financial misconduct, tax evasion, fraud, anything that could legally taint the club's reputation, grounds for expulsion, conduct unbecoming of a member, public scandals, bad press, anything that embarrassed. The club, also grounds for expulsion. Abusing club privileges for personal gain, using the club for shady dealings. Not tolerated. One wrong move and she could lose everything. That's when I made my decision. I was going to take her down. I didn't have a full plan yet. I just knew that if I was going to do this, I had to be careful. Vivian wasn't stupid. If I went after her too directly, she'd catch on. I had to make it look like she did this to herself. So I started small. I spent hours online, digging into club policies, past scandals, anything that could give me an angle. Then I started watching Vivian's patterns. She was predictable. Every Thursday at 6 p.m., she left her house and drove to the club. Every Sunday morning, she had brunch with her friends at an exclusive cafe. And every single time, she made sure the world knew. She documented everything. That was going to be her downfall. The first break in my plan came from my dad. We were on a casual phone call, talking about work, life, the usual. Then, completely out of nowhere, he said, "You know how Vivian always brags about how she and Uncle Jack handled their estate taxes? God, she loved that story." I stopped. "What story?" I asked. "Oh, you know, how they managed to work around inheritance taxes. She used to go on and on about it back when Jack was alive." That was it. That was my way in. If Vivian had been bragging about fudging estate taxes, she must have done something shady. And if I could prove it, that wasn't just a scandal. That was fraud. I hung up the phone, opened my laptop, and started searching. It was time to play detective. I had a lead. Now I needed proof. If Vivian really did work around estate taxes, there had to be something on record. A loophole. A shady transaction. Something. I started where most people wouldn't. Public records, estate filings, property transfers, charitable donations. Most of this information wasn't private. You just had to know where to look. And I looked everywhere. After a few hours, I found something interesting. In 2010, a $100,000 donation was made to a charity affiliated with Cascadia Elite Club. That might not seem like much, except for one thing. That was the same year Vivian became a member. It wasn't illegal to donate money to a charity. But when that charity was closely tied to a private club with a strict invite-only policy, that started to look like a backdoor payment. She didn't get in because of her status or social connections. She bought her way in. The club prided itself on exclusivity. If people found out that a membership could be bought, it would destroy their image. And the best part? Vivian had never mentioned this donation publicly. That told me one thing: she was hiding it. I had two options. I could go straight to the club, or I could make the club come to me. Option 2 was safer. If I directly accused her, she'd know where it came from. But if the club discovered it on their own, she'd never see it coming. So I created a fake journalist identity, Sarah Bennett. I set up an email, an online portfolio, even a LinkedIn page with a vague description. Investigative journalist covering financial corruption and high society scandals. Then, I sent my first email. To the Cascadia Elite Club Ethics Committee. I am gathering information on potential financial misconduct within Seattle's elite social circles. Recent tips suggest a high-profile club member may have engaged in tax-related fraud, including possible misuse of charitable donations. While I am still investigating, I wanted to confirm if the club has any policies regarding financial transparency for long-term members. Sincerely, Sarah Bennett. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. If there was even a hint of impropriety, the club would want to know. I needed more than just one piece of evidence. So, I started watching Vivian's habits. I took time-stamped photos of her car parked at the club. I noted which events she attended. I checked who she was interacting with. If I needed to build a timeline later, I'd be ready. Then, I played my next move. That Sunday, we had a family brunch. Vivian was there as expected, and I played nice. I asked her about the club, acted genuinely interested, told her I was considering networking opportunities there. She took the bait instantly. She went on about the exclusivity, the power, the connections, how not just anyone can get in. That's when I casually asked, "How did you get in?" She hesitated. For the first time, I saw something uncertain in her face. Then she smiled, shrugged, and said, "Oh, I was invited." Liar. That donation wasn't an invitation. It was a bribe. I reached out to Sophie. Keep it casual. Asked if Vivian had ever talked about her club membership. She didn't think much of it. And then just like that, she handed me another lead. Oh yeah, I remember her saying something about making a big donation the year she joined. Something about a strategic move. A strategic move. She had admitted it. That was all I needed. I sent another tip. This time, not to the club. To a local journalist. I didn't name names. I just made sure it was interesting enough that someone would want to dig deeper. Now, I just had to wait. The first domino had fallen, and Vivian had no idea. Waiting was the hardest part. I had done my part, sent the anonymous tips, planted the right conversations. Now, I just had to see what would happen. And then, a week later, I saw the first crack. Vivian was at a club event, one of those high-profile fundraisers where everyone pretends they care about charity while drinking $200 wine. Sophie was there too. And later that night, she sent me a text. Hey, you won't believe this, but people at the club are whispering about some kind of financial scandal. No one knows who, but it's getting tense. I smiled. It was working. I didn't want to make a direct move yet. I needed more tension, more pressure. So I went to an anonymous forum where club employees vented about their jobs. It was mostly filled with posts about entitled members, impossible demands, and ridiculous rules. But then I found something useful. A club staff member had complained about an older female member who once threw a tantrum over a spilled drink. I had a very good feeling I knew exactly who they were talking about. I sent them a message. Hey, I heard about that story. Wasn't she also involved in a shady club? Audit years ago? I didn't confirm anything. I just planted the seed. The response came quickly. Wait, what? I didn't know that. But honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. The rumor grew legs instantly. Within hours, people on the forum were connecting dots. That didn't even exist. By the next day, the whispers at the club had shifted. It wasn't just someone in trouble anymore. It was Vivian. Vivian didn't know where the rumors were coming from. She was too arrogant to think someone in her own family could be behind it, but she wasn't stupid. A few days later, at another family gathering, she was distracted, checking her phone constantly, frowning. Then she excused herself to take a call outside. I followed, just close enough to hear. I don't know who's spreading this, but it's ridiculous. No, I never did anything illegal. This is slander. I'll handle it. She was nervous. That's when I knew I had her. I wasn't done. It was time to take things one step further. I created a second burner identity, James Carter, a fake former accountant. Then I sent another email to the Cascadia Elite Club Ethics Committee. I used to work in financial consulting and came across discrepancies in a high-profile member's tax filings. While I am no longer associated with their finances, I believe some past transactions should be reviewed for compliance with club policies. Please keep my identity confidential. Sincerely, James Carter. This was different from the first tip. The first email from Sarah Bennett was vague. It was meant to stir curiosity. But this was a direct allegation. It forced them to start looking. And once they started, they were going to find something. A few days passed. Then Sophie sent me another message. OMG. Vivian is freaking out. She's convinced someone's out to get her. I asked her what happened. She said Vivian had stormed into the club, demanding to know who was spreading lies about her. People had noticed. The members who were already skeptical of her, they were starting to believe the rumors. Vivian wasn't helping herself either. Her anger, her paranoia, it made her look guilty. I needed one last piece of evidence before I let the whole thing collapse on her. So, I dug deeper. I searched YouTube for club event footage. And then, I found it. An old 2019 gala recording. It wasn't a scandalous video, not at first. But in the background, there she was, Vivian, drunk, loud, waving a wine glass while arguing with another club member. The argument itself didn't matter, but her behavior? That mattered a lot. I took a screenshot. Then, I sent another email to the club's ethics committee. There seems to be a pattern of behavior here. Please review this footage from a past event. It aligns with recent concerns about conduct unbecoming of a club member. No accusations, just a gentle nudge toward I. Something damaging. That was all I needed to do. Because at this point, Vivian was going to destroy herself. Vivian had spent her whole life untouchable. Untouchable wealth, untouchable status, untouchable reputation. Until now. Because now people were questioning her, not just outsiders, her own club members. And if there's one thing the wealthy, elite fear, public disgrace. It didn't take long for my emails to get results. A week after I sent the club the 2019 gala footage, the ethics committee responded, but not to me. They sent Vivian an official notice, a formal inquiry into her conduct, her financial history, and her eligibility as a club member. It was happening. And the best part? I didn't have to lift another finger. Vivian had spent decades using the club's exclusivity to prop herself up. Now, the same exclusivity was turning against her. Sophie sent me a text the next day. Vivian. Lost it. She was screaming on the phone with someone from the club board. She thinks one of her enemies set her up. I smirked. She had no idea it was me. At the next family dinner, she was quieter than usual. Tense, distracted. She barely touched her wine. Didn't brag about the club for the first time ever. But then, she turned to my dad and dropped the bomb. I need you to vouch for me. The club is reviewing my membership. My dad hesitated. Even he knew this wasn't normal. What's going on? He asked. Vivian exhaled sharply. Someone's spreading lies about me. The board thinks I used a backdoor to get into the club. Can you believe that? I watched her. She wasn't confident anymore. She was worried, and worried people make mistakes. That week, Vivian went into full-blown damage control. She called old club friends, begged them to speak on her behalf. Some agreed. But most didn't want to get involved. Why? Because even rich people know when to jump off a sinking ship. The club had been leaking rumors like crazy. Vivian's name was being tossed around in whispers, and nobody wanted to be next. Then, things got worse for her. A local news blog picked up the story. Nothing big, just a small gossip piece about a mysterious financial scandal brewing at Cascadia Elite. They didn't name her, but anyone in the know could put two and two together. The moment that article went live, Vivian knew she was screwed. Because now, this wasn't just a club issue, it was a public one. Vivian must have realized she was running out of options, because one night as I walked to my car, I noticed a gray sedan parked nearby. The driver wasn't doing anything suspicious, just flipping through his phone, but something about it felt off. I ducked back inside my apartment, my heart pounding. She hired a private investigator. She was looking for the person who set her up. I called Sophie. Vivian's getting desperate, I told her. Sophie sighed. She thinks it's one of her club rivals. She has no clue it could be family. That was good, but I needed to stay ahead. So I came up with an alibi. I told Daniel, if anyone asks, I've been sick all week, haven't left the apartment. That way, if Vivian started digging too close, there'd be nothing to pin on me. Daniel barely acknowledged me. He was starting to pull away. I don't like what you're doing, he muttered. But at that moment, I didn't care. Vivian was running, out of time. Her expulsion hearing was set for Friday. I needed to seal the deal, so I created one last forged document. A fake letter from a former business associate, claiming Vivian had pressured them into a shady investment. It was just vague enough to raise serious suspicion. Then, I mailed it directly to the club. Friday arrived. Vivian walked into the Cascadia Elite Club for her final hearing. She was dressed perfectly, a tailored suit, expensive heels, her last attempt to look untouchable, but her shoulders were stiff, her jaw was tight. She wasn't as confident as she wanted to seem. Inside, the ethics committee had gathered. Sophie was there. She sent me updates in real time. Vivian is trying to defend herself. She's claiming this is a smear campaign. I rolled my eyes. Of course she was. She went on about how she had been targeted, framed, sabotaged. But the board wasn't convinced. And then, Vivian made her biggest mistake yet. She snapped. She raised her voice at one of the committee members. She lost her composure. And just like that, the decision was made. By 8 p.m., the club announced it. Vivian was expelled, effective immediately. Outside the club, reporters swarmed her. She tried to walk past them, but someone shouted her name. "Are the allegations true?" Vivian snapped. She turned red-faced, screaming about lawsuits. The cameras caught it all. That was it. Her mask had shattered. The socialite, the untouchable, club member, gone. After that, everything unraveled. Vivian disowned the family. She packed up and fled to her vacation home in Oregon. Sophie called me, her voice cold. "I know you had something to do with this." I didn't deny it, but I didn't confirm it either. Because what was the point? Vivian had dug her own grave. I just made sure everyone was watching when she fell in. The club painted over Vivian's reserved parking spot. Her Instagram disappeared. Years of bragging, showing off, pretending. All deleted. At home, I found a letter from Daniel. He had left. For good. I can't be with someone who does things like this. The words stung, but as I sat alone, staring at my wedding invitation, the one Vivian ignored, I felt something else. Closure. I poured myself a glass of wine, Vivian's favorite Pinot Noir, and I took a sip. Somewhere she was sitting alone, watching her world crumble. I guess she wasn't living her best life anymore. Vivian was gone. Not physically. She still existed somewhere, holed up in her Oregon vacation home, but as far as her social standing was concerned, she had been wiped off the map. She had vanished from Cascadia Elite's website. Her name wasn't on the club's donor list anymore. Her longtime social circle? They had moved on without her. She tried to fight back, threatened lawsuits, hired a crisis PR team, but the damage was done. People didn't want to be associated with her anymore. Even her closest friends stopped returning her calls. And that was worse than any public humiliation. Because Vivian wasn't just rich. She was a woman who thrived on status. And without it, she had nothing. Sophie called me a week after the expulsion. She's still trying to figure out who did this to her. "Let her," I said. It didn't matter anymore. The club had turned on her. Even if she found out I was behind it, what was she going to do? Go to the police? And say what? I was kicked. Out of my elitist club because my niece exposed my shady finances? No. She'd never admit it. Not publicly. Because that would mean admitting that she lost. I thought about calling Daniel, trying to explain. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. He had already made up his mind. A few days later, I found another note he left behind. "Rachel, I loved you, but the person I loved wouldn't have done this." I stared at those words for a long time, because, deep down, I wasn't sure if he was wrong. Vivian wasn't the only casualty of this. The club had turned into a battlefield. With her scandal out in the open, people started digging into other members, questioning past donations, whispering about who else had paid their way in. People who once sat comfortably on top, now looking over their shoulders. And I watched it all unfold. I didn't start a fire. I just lit the match. 2 weeks after her expulsion, Vivian called me. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. But later that night, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door, and there she was. No designer dress, no polished smile, just a tired, angry woman. "You did this," she said. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say. She waited, maybe expecting me to deny it. I didn't. After a long moment, she exhaled sharply. "Congratulations," she muttered. "You won." Then she turned and walked away. And just like that, she was gone. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Vivian. I wasn't thinking about revenge or status or payback. I was just tired. I had gotten what I wanted. But in the process, I had lost Daniel. My parents barely spoke to me anymore. Sophie had figured it out. And while she didn't outright say it, I knew she would never look at me the same way again. I picked up my old wedding invitation, the one Vivian ignored. Ran my fingers over the embossed letters. Then, without really thinking, I ripped it in half. And just like that, I was done. Vivian's name faded from society. She wasn't invited to exclusive events anymore. She stopped posting online. Her once meticulously curated life, deleted. And me? I rebuilt. Slowly. Piece by piece. I moved to a new apartment, started fresh. Got back to focusing on my own success. Not revenge, not proving a point. Just living. One day I walked by the cherry blossom trees where Daniel had proposed. The petals were falling, drifting onto the sidewalk, and for the first time in a long time, I let go. Vivian wasn't my problem anymore. The past wasn't my problem anymore. I had won. But maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been a victory worth keeping. Winning should have felt good. For months, I had imagined this moment. Vivian, stripped of her status, reduced to nothing more than another forgotten socialite. And yet, as I moved on with my life, I started realizing something. Revenge doesn't come without a cost. Daniel was gone. Sophie barely spoke to me. My parents were disappointed in me in a way they wouldn't even put into words, and no one even knew for sure that I was behind it. It was the distance they felt, the way I had changed, the way I had made it clear that I was capable of something, calculated. I wasn't the same person, and I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or not. Sophie kept tabs on Vivian from a distance. She said she wasn't checking up on her, but I knew better. She's still in Oregon, she told me one night over the phone. No one talks about her anymore. No one missed her. No one invited her anywhere. It was as if she had never existed. I imagined her sitting in that vacation home, scrolling through social media, watching as life moved on without her. She had spent her whole life obsessed with being at the top. Now she wasn't even in the conversation. And somehow I didn't feel satisfied. A few months passed. One afternoon, I got a text from Sophie, a link to an online auction. "You'll want to see this." I clicked the link, and there it was, Vivian's belongings, furniture, jewelry, her beloved Rolls-Royce. She was selling everything. At first, I thought maybe she was downsizing, but Sophie sent me another message. She lost the house. I stared at the screen for a long time. Vivian wasn't just erased from high society, she was erased from her own life. One night, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Rachel, I think you should reach out to Vivian." I laughed. "You're kidding, right?" "She's not doing well," my mom said carefully. "She brought it on herself." "Maybe," my mom admitted. "But at the end of the day, she's still family." I almost said so was I, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew what she meant. I had wanted Vivian to suffer. But how much suffering was enough? For days, I debated it. Should I call her? Should I check in? Should I just forget she ever existed? In the end, I sent a text. It was short. "I heard about the house. I hope you're okay." No accusations, no gloating, just a statement. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. I stared at the screen. Vivian's name. One word. Why? That was it. Not an attack, not an accusation, just a single word, a question. And I didn't have an answer. I never responded. I deleted the message. Vivian never reached out again. She disappeared into her own version of exile. And I tried to rebuild. I wasn't a villain, but I wasn't exactly innocent either. And maybe that's what haunted me the most. I had won. But in the end, I wasn't sure if I had actually won anything at all. I stood at the window one chilly evening, watching the city lights flicker like memories that refused to fade. The silence in my apartment felt heavy with everything that had happened. Vivian's downfall, the crumbling of my own relationships, the cost of my carefully planned revenge. In that quiet moment, I realized that the victory I had once envisioned wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. I had dismantled her world piece by piece, and in doing so, I had altered mine in ways I never expected. I had traded innocence for a relentless hunger to expose every hidden secret. I had gained control, yet lost the warmth of the connections that once made life feel whole. My phone buzzed, but I ignored it. Each message was a reminder of what I had sacrificed. Daniel's words still echoed in my mind, a plea for the person I used to be. My parents' disappointment barely hidden behind strained voices, Sophie's silence which said more than any argument could. I had become someone I barely recognized, a person who, in seeking to bring down someone else, had also built walls around my own heart. I thought about the times I'd chased the truth, every careful step taken to unravel a legacy built on pretension and deceit. Each move was calculated, every email and forged document a small victory over a woman who had always seemed untouchable. But in the end, exposing her wasn't enough to fill the void left behind. I had succeeded in making the elite pay a price for their arrogance, yet I was left with an unsettling emptiness that no public scandal could ever cure. The night deepened, and with it came a realization that revenge, no matter how meticulously executed, often leaves scars on the one who enacts it. The taste of triumph had soured quickly. I had expected satisfaction, but instead I felt the burden of every decision, every sleepless night, and every moment of isolation that followed. As the dawn approached, I made a silent promise to myself, to rebuild not by tearing down those who once hurt me, but by learning from the consequences of my own actions. I resolved to try to mend the broken connections, if possible, even if it meant accepting that some bridges, once burned, might never be rebuilt. I had to accept that sometimes the cost of victory is far greater than the gain. Standing there, I finally understood that the reckoning wasn't just for Vivian or the club, it was for me too.